And this is now, hopefully we're going to get down a little bit more into the nitty-gritty. I'm going to ask you guys some questions, a little bit more time for you guys to reflect, for you time to write some answers down, to discuss a little bit more as we try to kind of, figure out, yeah, I transition, change, failure, like that's all well and good, but like what do I do now? What do I do with that? How do I move forward? How do I really actually start figuring this out? So that's hopefully what we're going to get to now as we move forward. I think for a lot of us, kind of the theme of this talk and what we're talking about, you might feel like you're in transition, or you might just feel like you're not in transition at all. You're just stuck. It's like, I'm not moving anywhere. I'm not changing. I'm not doing anything. I'm just kind of stuck in a rut. I don't know how to get out of that. So maybe I am transitioning and changing. I don't see it, but just what is going on? I just kind of feel stuck with everything. And I know for me, it was always kind of about answering this huge, giant question. And I mentioned this before in my first talk, but these big, giant words that we talk about, what is your passion, your calling, your career, your purpose? It's these giant concepts. And we talk about them so lightly, like, oh, have you found your calling yet? It's like, oh, no. Thanks for asking me that. Or you're like going to college, I remember graduation parties, or something, and people like, so what are you going to do now, Paul? What are you going to do for a living? Like, I'm just trying to clean this house that 7 guys lived in, and hopefully the landlord lets us leave. Other than that, I have no plans. So I've spent a lot of my career and a lot of my time focusing on writing and reading through the Bible and different books and everything and trying to figure out the answer to this. And the metaphor I like to think of this as, and I know we think about and talk about this concept in different ways, but I like thinking about it as this metaphor of finding your signature sauce. And that's the title of this talk, is Finding Your Signature Sauce. And what I mean by that, I just love the metaphor of that, because I feel like that's so much more true to figuring this question out of what is my calling, what is my career, is picturing each one of us as the chef in a kitchen, this master chef. And do any of you guys like watching the chef shows and documentaries, like Chef's Table on Netflix? Has anybody seen Chef's Table on Netflix? I love Chef's Table. I'm such a sucker for watching these chef documentaries and chef shows, because it's amazing watching them work, in the kitchen. And they're putting these ingredients together and they're trying to create this flavor that people are going to want to taste. And almost always in the Chef's Table in these shows, it's this story about this chef starting a restaurant like they think they should start a restaurant, having a plan, and then having everything fall apart. Nobody wants to go to the restaurant. It completely fails. It's everything that I talked about in the first part of this talk. And then they go to the wilderness, they go to the desert, they go through the struggle, and then they come back and they start putting together these ingredients that are unique to them. That creates this flavor that no one else is bringing forth to this world and everybody wants to taste. And I think for all of us, we are like those chefs in the kitchen trying to find our signature sauce. We're putting together these ingredients that are within us to create this flavor that no one else can bring to the table but us. And I love this quote by a guy named Seth Godin, I've read anything by Seth Godin. He's like a business marketing whiz, somebody that I follow. And he talks about that the future belongs to chefs, not cooks or bottle washers. It's easy to buy a cookbook filled with instructions to follow, but it's really hard to find a chef book. Chefs create their own book, right? You can't follow that. There's no instructions to figure out, here's how you find, here's what your calling is. There's not this, reading the Bible is a way to do that. Reading, great thinkers and mentors and stuff, but it's this process that we go through as we figure out, what ingredients are within me? What has God created me with? And the Bible talks about this a lot, and we'll hit those verses, but I love this quote by an author named Parker Palmer. And he talks about that we find our callings by claiming our authentic selfhood. And I love that, that your search for your calling is not this existential search where you're going on this, you're searching for this treasure and you're following this map, and if you miss the turn, you're going to miss your calling for the rest of your life. He's saying, no, it's about claiming the ways that you are created and owning that and honing that and uncovering the flavor, your unique signature sauce. And the Bible has lots of different verses that points to this, that says, Ephesians 2:10, that we are God's masterpiece. He has created us anew in Christ Jesus so that we can do good things He has planned for us long ago. And then, a famous verse, Psalm 139, that I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. And I love the weight of that verse. Just the permanence of that. Man, that, God was putting me together in the depths of the earth, and He knows me. And His works are wonderful. His creations are wonderful, And He has created each of us with so much intentionality and purpose. And again, if you think about the odds, I love thinking about these questions, but thinking of the odds of that you're even sitting here, that you exist. It's just wild. If you're a mathematician breaking it down, I've seen some different mathematicians try to do it, and it's 1 to the 10th, 27th billion power, that all your ancestors got together when they did, all the different pieces of your mom and dad getting together, all the different chromosomes and DNA all coming together, all the different parts. The odds are wild. It's basically I heard one scientist say it's everybody within San Diego rolling a trillion-sided dice and all hitting the same number every single time. If you break down the odds of you being here. So yeah, I think we can talk about that God has put a lot of intentionality and purpose in each one of us. And that we are God's craftsmanship and He's created us in our image. And there's something to that. And there's something magical and amazing about the way that God has designed each one of us. And that's a picture of me riding a horse. And I had this picture of a horse. I love getting to do talks because I get to talk about myself all day. It's great. I don't get to talk about myself at home at all. But here I get to talk about myself all the time. It's very narcissistic, very millennial of me. But I worked at a ranch in Colorado during my summers of college, and it was just an amazing job. And most of our job was spent taking guests out on horseback rides. Have you ever been on a trail ride before? Aren't they a lot more boring than you think they're going to be? I don't know if you've been on those trail rides, where you think it's going to be all exciting, you're on a horse, and you're following some guy with a cowboy hat, and then you're in this line. And your horse just wants to sniff the other horse's butt and eat all the time, and you're just trying to keep it from eating. I've been on trail rides, where I hear a yell from behind me, and there's a teenage girl laying flat on her horse as the horse has gone under a tree and is just parked there, and now the girl is looking at a branch and stuck. I'm the horse is probably just laughing oh my gosh, this is so beneath me. Get this person off my back, But there was times as wranglers, my friends and I, we would go out on horseback rides and we would play tag on horseback. Which again, I don't recommend doing. I wouldn't do it now that I have kids, but back then it seemed like a good idea. And we would take the crazy horses out. The horses that we were trying to break and get guests ready. That was part of our job. So we'd take these crazy horses out, we'd go play tag up in the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. So we're running everywhere and you're trying to tag the other guy on his horse and horses don't like things flying at them, They kind of get a little scared about that. But we'd do this, and there was this one time that 3 of us, we were playing tag, and we'd gone way up, and our horses were fired up. If you've ever on a horse running full speed and stuff, they get fired up. And we were pointed back towards home, and we're we probably should calm down. We should probably calm the horses down. And then, of course, me and my buddy look at each other, and we just both take off again, And we're running right side by side each other, and then his horse headbutts my horse in the hip. And I kind of jolt, and then my horse takes off into another gear that I did not know a horse had. So we go flying through this valley. This big open valley, and we are flying, and I'm starting to realize that I have no control anymore over this horse. So I'm trying to pull back, and we're going full speed, and I've lost full control. So we're flying down this valley, and there's this ravine coming up. In my mind, it's like a Grand Canyon-esque ravine. This thing is huge. It might have been a small ditch. But, we were going towards this thing, and I know I'm not going to stop the horse in time, and so we just go flying over. And so I want to say I let out a manly yell, but it was probably a little higher octaves as I went over this. And we go crashing on the other side. I hold on. I stay on the horse. He lands. We go sprinting, and now we're coming up to this wall of trees. And I'm like, is he going to just run us through these trees? Is he going to like have his final say and just kill me against these trees? So I'm trying to pull back. I'm pulling back as hard as I can, and he just stops right in front of the trees. And just like nothing ever happened. You know. But he's fired up, and my heart is racing, his heart is racing. And I remember sitting there thinking, thanking God, one, that I was alive. And then two, I remember thinking, man, it was so incredible being on a horse that literally didn't even care if I was on him or not, but being on a horse that was fully being a horse. Like fully being the way God had designed a horse to be. Like with all the strength and with all the speed. And I was like, man, I was like so thankful that I got to experience that and not die in the process, But I talk about that because I think for a lot of us, we kind of get stuck on that trail ride, right? Where we're kind of stuck following another horse. We don't really know. We're just kind of, we want to get off. We want to be that horse. We want to be how God fully designed us. And so it's how do we figure that out? How do we get to that place where it's not just talk, but we feel like, man, I'm figuring out some of these pieces. And I like this quote by a guy named Paul Graham, and he's in the business world. He does a lot. He's helped like Reddit and Airbnb. And he talks about this a little bit. He talks about, and he uses almost religious terms, but he says your only salvation is to mine your uniqueness in this economy, to combine various skills that set you apart. No one can do what you do. That is your end game. So it's again, you see this kind of merging together of ingredients, these certain things that you only can do, and how do we bring those ingredients together? And then a pastor, Mark Batterson, who you probably maybe read some of his books, a well-known pastor, he talks about this idea that uniqueness isn't a virtue, but it's a responsibility. That when I'm talking about being unique, I'm not just trying to puff you up and make us more narcissistic or think about ourselves in a puffed up way. I'm saying, no, like Mark Batterson is saying, it's a stewardship question, right? It's you are uniquely made with unique gifts and skills and talents. So what do we do with that? What do we do with that? How do we hone that? What's the reason for that? How do we mix that together? What is our signature sauce? But when I'm talking about your signature sauce, and I'm talking about these ingredients, and we're going to get into some of the ingredients, what we're also kind of talking about is branding, so to speak. If you've taken business class, you talk about branding a lot. There's a lot of talk about personal branding, and it's kind of overdone a little bit, but basically it's kind of this. It's this in a nutshell. So this was no label. And inside was kind of a mix of green beans mixed with like water. Like not a very distinct taste, but you wouldn't really know what was in it, right? Because there's nothing to describe it to you. You have no idea. It's just a mystery. It's a mystery what's in there. And then this guy we did next, which was beets. But it had been switched, and there was actually pineapple juice in it. And I think sometimes this can be our case, where we are, and for me, I hate beets. So that's why I chose it. I don't like beets at all. They make me very sick when I eat beets. They're weird, like coming out of the ground. I mean, it's like this weird hybrid vegetable from another planet or something in my mind, But sometimes we have this different label, where we're saying we're this thing, And in my mind, beets, I don't like beets. And inside there was pineapple juice, which is really sweet. But who's going to take this? And who's going to buy this and who's going to eat this hoping they have pineapples, right? No one is. And same for this. Same for then the pineapples, And sometimes this happens. And sometimes we do this in a job interview, right? Where we're like, yeah, I'm pineapples. Like totally. I'm totally pineapple. I can be pineapple all day for you and make tons of money being a pineapple. And then like 3 months in, it's like beets and green beans. Because you're not a good fit for the job, right? And it's a total mess. Total mess. And then you got this, this is branding. This is the idea of branding. The graphics might not be, there's no sugar added, and it's fruit cocktail, and it's delicious. And inside it's fruit cocktail. And who doesn't like fruit cocktail? Don't raise your hand if you don't like fruit cocktail. Totally ruins the exercise. No. But yeah, this is how it is, right? They describe it with amazing ingredients. It's fruit cocktail. It's delicious. It's great tasting fruit. You've come to trust, right? You've come to trust fruit. It's amazing. But right, this is what I'm talking about when we're in more of a business sense or in a descriptive sense. it's not just idyllic thinking. It's not just, oh, I need to find my signature sauce. No, what we're doing is trying to accurately figure out what ingredients are in yours, and then how do we accurately describe that? You need to define it to then be able to represent that, right? And that's what a resume is. That's what a job interview is. That's what a LinkedIn profile is basically you trying to do this. It's saying, yeah, there's some great stuff inside, and here's my description and my pictures, and here's my story to say this is who I am. This is why you should take a big bite out of fruit cocktail, right? That's what it's about. So what's in the bag? We figured it out. And so when I think about signature sauce and I think about the different ingredients, and this slide I don't think's in your handout, but you can write some of these down. You know, some of these you've heard of before, and you've probably done this before. You know, you've probably done the Strengths Finder before. And I know even at Saddleback, there's different programs that you're learning about yourself, learning about, okay, how has God designed me? How am I wired? But I've come, through all my research, I feel like there's 10 main ingredients that go into, successful people and their signature sauce, and when they're really living out their calling, they've got these different ingredients in work that they've thought through, they've intentionally figured out, they're living by. And again, it's this blend of ingredients and how it comes together. It's not just one ingredient, but it's the blend and all these different pieces coming together. Inattentional blindness. It's the failure to notice something that's right in front of your vision because another attention-demanding task is at place. And the reason I bring that up as we dive into these ingredients is because, man, this is like the definition of all of our lives. We have all these attention-demanding tasks, especially if you're working or you're at school or whatever, with family, when you have kids. I've got 3 kids, and let me tell you, that's a lot of attention-demanding tasks that are all the time. It never stops, right? And so it's hard to miss stuff that's going right in front of your face. And I feel like a lot of the times God is showing us things. God's revealing us things. God's whispering to us. God's saying, hey, this is what it's all about. And we just miss it because we're so busy and other things are demanding our attention. So that's what I want to do now. I want us to think about our own lives and dive into this a little bit. And some of these questions you might have thought of before. That's fine. Some of the questions, maybe this is the first time you thought about it. That's great. But as we move forward, I just want you to go through the process of trying to figure out some of this for your own life. And I'm going to start with the idea of story as an ingredient. And in the sense of that you each are living your own story, right? That you guys are your story. And, I'm an author, so I love the concept of story. I love the idea of story. But just like with a book, you wouldn't pick up the book and start reading it in the middle to figure out what's happening with the story, right? You would start it at the beginning to figure out, okay, what's going on with the story? Well, I think that's true for a lot of our lives. In this idea of figuring out, okay, what are the ways I'm wired, and how do I think about this in the idea of my story and then other stories? So the way I think about it is, what are some of the pivotal plot points? Every story has these pivotal plot points, these major things that happen that move the story along. So in your life, I think a lot of times these come in 2 different ways. They come in triumphs, so really exciting things that happen, amazing successes, or they happen with tragedies, with harder things that you've gone through. That can be a pivotal plot point in your life, something hard that you go through, that struggle part. So I want you right now to think about some of these questions, as well as, what are some of your favorite stories? And that can seem elementary, that can seem like AP English or something, right? But what are some stories that you love, that you resonate with? Because if we go around this room, we probably wouldn't get the same answer if I asked your 3 favorite stories, your 3 favorite movies, your 3 favorite books. We wouldn't get the same answer, probably at all. Everybody would have a slightly different answer because these stories resonate with you in a different way. There's certain stories that resonate with me in a different way, and it's based on my story. A story that speaks to my soul, speaks to my story. This is something that's not just, you answer it simply and you just move on. Like, this is something to think about for the rest of our lives. What are these pivotal plot points in our story? What does that say about my story? And with the idea of need being another ingredient, and what I mean by that, it's similar to what I was saying before, that your greatest purpose in the future might be one of your greatest pains in the present. A lot of the time it's out of that struggle, it's out of that frustration, it's out of the pain that you start finding your passion again, that you start figuring out, okay, what is a need that I want to meet? What is a problem that I see that I want to do something about? right? For me, it was I want to help other 20-somethings that are feeling the same way I am. So it's something I was passionate about. It was a huge need. It was a huge problem. And we're all going to see needs and problems in different ways. Again, it's based on your story. It's based on your signature sauce. There's things that frustrate you that probably don't frustrate me. And there's things that frustrate me that probably don't frustrate you. Because again, this is unique to us, unique to our wiring. And I love this famous, Frederick Buechner quote, that your vocation, your career, is where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. And that's what Frederick Buechner is talking about. When he's talking about the world's deep hunger, he's talking about a huge need. And if you look at every, I think back to every, youth pastor I had, like junior high or high school, I think back to my, the guys I looked up to, and they were always they came from the most jacked up backgrounds ever, right? They were doing the craziest drugs, they were drinking the most. My youth pastor literally had this huge scar on his arm from a time when he was doing drugs and decided to heat up a chain, and they had a contest for who could keep this chain that was blazing hot around their arm the longest. And then he ripped it and ripped off all his skin. And this was my youth pastor that's taking us on camping trips, But the thing is, he was so passionate about helping kids not go down the wrong path because he'd seen the pain of that. That was a big part of the tragedies of his story, that were being redeemed constantly in the lives of every single kid that they were shaping and changing, right? I know a friend of ours who went through a really hard marriage, whose husband unfortunately cheated on her, and they got a divorce. And now that woman is remarried, she has a great husband, and she's a marriage and family therapist. That pain, that frustration, knowing what it's like to be there, that gave her that thing to say, I want to do something about it. I want to help others who have gone through this. I know what it's like. So a lot of the times that, it's a weird way to think about it, because we don't think about the things that bother us as something that, there's something to that. There's something, again, about your story that you see problems and needs differently than everybody else. So that's the questions, when you look at your triumphs or tragedies, what are some needs or problems that were at the center of those? What was a problem that was affecting you in the tragedy, or what was a problem that you were doing something about in the triumph? What was the need there? Can you identify any of those? And also these other questions, if you're trying to figure out, okay, what are some problems, some things the needs that I feel like are something I should do something about? Well, what do you complain about? What's something that you complain about? What's something that frustrates you? It could be on a big macro level, or it could be very micro. It could be very much in your work. The processes in my job are all messed up, and I want to help streamline those, and it's a problem that really frustrates me. Well, that's a need that you see that probably other people don't see. So again, it can be very macro and micro. This is something that takes time to think about, but I want you guys to think about this question and start figuring out, okay, is there some needs or problems that, whether in a big scale or a small scale or something that I'm just, if I think I want to do something about these, or I am doing something about these, what are those? This is something that I take people through in 10 weeks. So to do it all in one night, it's tough, right? We're answering some pretty deep questions to figure out. But at least if you're asking yourself these questions, again, it's about that intentional blindness. Oh yeah, there is this problem that bugs me at work that I want to do something about. Or there is this business idea that I've been thinking about, and it's based on something that, a need that I see. Because basically every business is that, right? At the simplest form, every business is meeting a need. That's it, And then they either do a good job of meeting that need, or they don't do a good job meeting that need. But that's, that's business. Or, every author is meeting a need. They've identified some problem. That's the source. But another ingredient that I want to talk about is what I call your soul values. And what I mean by soul values is these core beliefs within you that instruct, guide, and form your decision-making process, thoughts, and behavior. So basically, these are the key things that when you're met with a hard decision, when you're trying to figure out what you want to do in life, these are, what I would call some of your non-negotiables. These are things that you really believe in. And the beauty of it is trying to figure out, and we're going to talk about this next, your skills and your talents. And I know we talk about skills a lot, but is how do your values and your skills mesh up? How do they work together? So for me, I always felt like, well, I like to talk, communication, and, on the StrengthsFinders test, I get communication as a strength. So I always thought I should do sales jobs. And so I would try to do sales jobs, and I would do terrible at sales jobs. And I'd be like, what is the matter? Like, is it a problem with my skill set? And what am I doing? And I started realizing that a big value of mine is authenticity. So I always felt like I was selling something that I didn't believe in at all, and I didn't really think people needed. And so my value actually trumped my strength. My strength of communication wasn't a strength anymore because I was talking about something that was contradicting a value of mine. And I think a lot of the times when we're feeling anxious at work, or we feel like, man, this is just not a good fit, sometimes it could be a skill set question. It could be a skill set problem. You're just not doing something that's in your skill set wheelhouse. Or a lot of the times, it's just contradicting some values of yours. That you're just like, man, this value of mine is just totally a contradiction here, and it's making me feel anxious. So let's think about what our soul values are. And I put a list, I think there's a list towards the back of like 160 value words, because there's so many words that you could pick as like a value of yours. But then there's these questions that I've asked to kind of get us thinking about this. And I think sometimes you can figure out what your values are by looking at people who inspire you the most. And what is it about them that inspires you? And a lot of the times that'll be rooted down into a value-based question. There's values in that person that you really respect. There's some values of them, it could be they have great creativity and you have a value for creativity. And it could be a skill, it could be a strength, but also a value word. And then what are some of your non-negotiables? These are some of the questions to think about for a few minutes. Again, sorry, we can't do tons of time, but again, this is not something you have to just answer right now. You can keep thinking about this. But think about, what are some of my values? And then if you can, and this is the hard part, and this is something, again, that I think a lot of people know, like, oh, I know what I value. Like, it's like love and justice and stuff like that, right? Like, what biblical words? Like, where's the verse for, like, love is kind and all, that's my values. But literally, when it comes down to a decision, like, what is your number one value? Like, what's a value that trumps everything? Like, if that value is not being met, there's problems. And then what's, like, your number two value? And three, like, if you can even rank them, it can be tough, and it can be an interesting exercise to go through to figure out, okay, what are my top values? What are my core beliefs? This is typically kind of we're taking these steps, we're going up the ladder, we're climbing the corporate ladder or whatever, but instead I feel like this is more what the career journey is like now. It's like doing this island hopping where you're not climbing the ladder anymore, you're not climbing the steps, you're like going on this crazy adventure and you're stopping at different islands, different jobs, different volunteer experiences, whatever it might be, and you've been building skill sets at these different places. It's something to think about. If you think back to your current job, your past jobs, what are some skills that you've been growing? And there's a diagram on the back where I have that island diagram, so you can even write it in if you want, some of the skills you grew at different jobs, and even jobs that you necessarily didn't like very much. And you might be in a job right now that you don't like very much. But there's something of real importance that can happen there. And I'll tell one quick story to kind of illustrate this point, and I write about this in my book, 101 Secrets to Your 20s, that I was at a Starbucks, and I was sitting there trying to write, and it was in Colorado, and it was around Christmas time, so this Starbucks was packed. I mean, Colorado, it's like snowing. It's like the perfect time to go to Starbucks and get like your, latte or your Christmas nog drink or whatever it is. So everybody's there in the Starbucks, and I'm watching people get their drinks, but they're not leaving. Like, they're getting their drinks, and there's this huge line of people that have their drinks, but they're not leaving, and there's this huge crowd right there. And like, no one can get through, and I'm watching this, I'm like, why aren't people leaving once they've gotten their drinks? And I start noticing that they're all waiting in line to talk to the barista that's making the drinks. Like he's making the drinks and he's asking them about their families, asking them how their job interview went. They're talking to them and they're like all waiting their turn. So finally somebody leaves and then the next person comes up and the barista's like, hey, Mary, how's it going? And I don't know how, if you've been a barista, I don't know how you talk and make drinks. And like that is mind-blowing to me to do all that, But this guy is doing it. And I'm like, man, what is this guy's story? I start watching this guy, right? And so then this guy takes a break and he's walking around and people literally are calling from their tables and they're like, hey, come over here, you gotta meet my friend. Or hey, can you introduce me to this person? Like they're calling out to this guy and I'm like, is this guy like the mayor of Starbucks? Like this barista? Like, should I get his autograph? Like I started getting nervous. Should I introduce myself to him? Like it was this big thing. But I'm a writer, so I started thinking like, what is this guy's story? Like again, story, what is this guy's story? Like why is this guy doing such an amazing job? So I'm thinking about it and he's like, he was like mid-30s. So he wasn't fresh out of college. I knew that. So I'm like, okay, he's in his 30s. Maybe he was in the real estate business. And when the Great Recession happened, like he lost everything, right? Like that would be a good tragedy for his story, right? And he lost everything and he moved back into his parents' basement because the hero always has to move back into like their parents' basement, right? So he moved back into his parents' basement. And then I see him limp a little bit, and I'm like, oh, and he has one leg, of course, right? Like he must have one leg. I was creating this like Hallmark character in my head of this mayor of Starbucks. But everything that I just told you guys is actually not a fake story, it's actually a true story, because the mayor of Starbucks was actually my brother. And I'd never seen him work at a Starbucks before, but everything that I just said was true. He was in the real estate business and lost everything. He moved back in with my parents in his 30s and lived in the basement. The dude has one leg, born without a leg, so he has a prosthetic leg, and he works at Starbucks on his feet. And it's so hard for him, and he's in a lot of pain, but like that's the job he has right now. But the dude is so loved when he's working at Starbucks. And I was so convicted watching him. Because I was thinking about all the jobs that I've had where I'm like, well, this is not my dream job or this is not my passion. So I kind of did a crappy job at my crappy job, right? And then I got more crappy jobs after that because it's a self-fulfilling cycle. But I asked my brother, I'm like, how do you do it? How do you do it? And he's like, well, I made an intentional choice that I was going to do the best job that I absolutely could and learn the most that I could, even though this job is not the best for me right now, right? And there's almost this freeing aspect of that perspective because it's like no matter what situation you're in, you might be in a terrible job, and I've been in them. I worked at a call center for inbound calls, and if you've ever worked at a call center, people were waiting on hold for an hour to talk to me. And so it was just 8 hours of getting cussed at and yelled at all the time. And I would start at like 6 in the morning. So it was mainly all East Coast people because I was here in California. So it was all East Coast people, it was all New Yorkers early in the morning cussing at me, And I remember taking my breaks, and you once you hang up, the phone's ringing again, like you never stop, like there's no break. They time your bathroom breaks, it was like all timed. It was nuts. But I remember thinking to myself, like, God, why am I here? And I remember him, saying, like, you got to learn something here. What can you learn here? What can you learn here? What can you do here to grow? What skill are you going to need to take with you on this career journey of yours that you're going to need later on? So it's again a freeing aspect, I think, for all of us. Even if you don't like your job or you don't even have a job, like what's that one thing you can focus on? I want to grow that skill. I want to keep working at that thing because I think I'm going to need that later in my journey. I think I'm going to need that later on. And what do you need to keep growing in skills? What are those skills that you need to keep growing and harnessing? For me, I wanted to be a writer. But I wasn't getting publishers to say yes because they kept saying you got to build a platform, you got to build an audience. So I had to become a better writer. I had to learn how to blog and do websites and social media and all this stuff I didn't want to do because I'm lazy. I just wanted a best-selling book, like just make it a bestseller. Instead, I had to learn all these different skills that now are like the core of what I do every day. I'm so thankful I had to learn those skills. Another ingredient, and again, we'll talk about this quickly, is relationships. So, your signature sauce is not just within you. It's within community again. It's these relationships. And you hear about it all the time, that most of your job opportunities are going to come through other people, right? It's not like that random, monster, career ad that you answer and you get like this amazing job. No, usually it's like a family friend or, somebody you graduated with or somebody, it comes through relationships. And there's actually theories called the power of loose ties is what they call it. These kind of loose connections, these people that you've met, they end up having this huge monumental aspect to your story. And that was definitely the case for me. But as we're networking and meeting people, honestly, I've been to some recent networking events and I hate the word networking. I don't know if you're the same. This is a verse about, walking with the wise. I got to throw in the Bible verse to make sure relationships are important, I guess. But I hate networking, and it's this idea, that I would say for all of us, stop networking. Stop networking like a machine and start relationshiping like a person. So no matter where you go. And what I mean by relationshiping, and this is a new way I'm thinking about it, is how do I serve other people when I meet them? How do I serve other people in conversation when I meet them for the first time? And how do I ask them really good questions? So instead of thinking about networking about me and let me get my business card out and I need to prove this person that I'm amazing, that doesn't work. What works actually better is for you to ask somebody really good questions, take really good interest in them, to serve them in conversation. You might not talk about yourself at all, and they might leave that conversation thinking, that person's amazing. Like, that's the most amazing person, and you haven't even said anything. But you serve them in that conversation. So relationships are a big part of finding your signature sauce, of using your signature sauce. It's not just done in isolation. But as you leave from here, think about these relationships in your life. And the funny term that I say, or the hokey term, who's going to be on your dream team? If you are going to move forward with something, if you are going to try to do something big, these things we've been talking about, if you're going to get uncomfortable, you're going to need some people to support you on this journey again. Can't do it alone. Another theme that we've been hitting on, you can't do this alone. You've got to have other people. And hopefully people that you've realized will speak life into that dream. They'll give you some truth, they'll give you, good feedback, but they're not what I call, which is what my second question was, they're not predominantly critics, cynics, or what I call reality checkers. I don't know if you have people like that in your life. Sometimes they can be your own parents, who they love to douse you with what they call reality checks. Obviously, we all need truth, but we got to be careful who we're receiving that advice from. And like I always say, be careful, especially if if you're taking advice from a very insecure person about their own career and their own passion, right? Taking advice from an insecure person like that is like taking driving lessons from a 6-year-old. Like, why would you do that, And again, I'm not saying don't take sound advice, but take sound advice from the wise people that you have in your life. Just be careful who you share your dream with. Pick strategic people to be on your dream team. And then as you think about, whether you come here and you're married, whether you come here and you're dating, whether you want to be dating, that's a big part of your dream team, is that relationship, is that partner. And how are your signature sauces melding together? How do you talk about this together? How do you support each other? Even something like your soul values. Whether you're married or whether you're dating or where you want to be, have you talked about, okay, what's your key core soul values and what's my soul values? And sometimes those can be in conflict with each other. Someone might have a value for security and someone might have a value for risk. Those are two good values. There's nothing wrong with those values, but they could be, in conflict with each other. So thinking about these aspects in the concept of your relationships. So we're wrapping up here. We're pretty much right on time, but just that reminder, that I totally believe this with all my heart, and I think it's so important that we all need the unique flavor. The world needs the unique flavor you bring to this world. I don't know about you guys, but I get so sick. I can't even get on Twitter or watch the news or anything. It's just all so much negative stuff, and it's like we need people that are in this room to rise up with that unique flavor and to keep chipping away at it and to fail, but to realize you're not a failure, and that's part of that process, and just keep plugging away at it because we need that more than ever, I feel like. We need people that are willing to take the risks and give people and serve people their signature sauce, in a way that brings life instead of what is going on all the time. And then also, it's just a powerful place to operate from. And I love this quote from Mother Teresa. That really, this is about being humble. It's not about being narcissistic again. It's, if you're truly humble, nothing will touch you, neither praise nor disgrace, because you know what you are. And sometimes we think about, again, if I'll be successful, and then, I get into accolades and the praise, and sometimes that can ruin you more than people telling you you're terrible and nothing working out. But again, if you know who you are, you know where you're operating from, you're able to just kind of navigate that and be like, okay, yeah, I know what I'm doing. I know the lane I'm in. I know the path I'm on, and this is why I'm doing that. And this can be a scary journey. Going back to what we talked about with transition, change, with being uncomfortable, with going through this process of trying to identify these things in your life. I remember reading this quote and feeling like, man, this is so spot on. It's talking about the hero's journey is a story of transformation. It's embarking on the journey. We must leave the world of certainty. Change is hell, yet not to change. To stay on the path of slow death is also hell. The difference is that the hell of deep change is the hero's journey. And I think God's calling all of us, to constantly, it's almost changing by becoming more of ourselves, by becoming more of the way God has designed us, our original design, and becoming more of that and transforming into that. And God is calling that out in us and saying, hey, I'm there with you. Even if it feels right now that you're painting fence like my buddy Micah next to Crazy Jane with only a t-shirt on, that God is there with you. And he's saying, I got you. I'm teaching you stuff. Keep going. Keep being persistent. And again, goes back to that concept that we talked about before. That being lost, that sometimes it's about being lost on purpose, with purpose. So I'm going to close out with something a little different. I'm going to kind of dim the lights. And I'm just going to kind of walk us through something just for a few minutes. And I know we're past time, but this will be the last thing that I do. Everybody just kind of sit and, put the papers away. Don't look at anything. Maybe close your eyes if you want to. This is going to only be a few minutes. I promise I'm not going to come and slap you or anything. I'm not going to give you beets and green bean sauce or anything. But I'm going to play a song, and I'm just going to kind of speak over the song and just kind of follow my words, and just we'll see what happens, okay? So you're in this field, and you're coming up to a mountain, and you see this path in front of you, of this mountain path, and you start climbing this mountain path because you feel like you need to go up there somewhere. So visualize this path in front of you. You're climbing up it. And as you keep climbing up this path, it's starting to get steeper and harder. And you literally have to start grabbing the edge of the cliff, and you keep climbing up. You don't know why you're going up, but you feel like something is up there. You just have to get up there. And so you're climbing this cliff. And it's getting harder, and you don't know why you're doing this, and you feel like, man, am I going to fall? What's going to happen? And you get kind of above this ledge, and you stumble a little bit, and you fall back on your back on this ledge. You don't fall all the way down. You just fall back, and you're lying there. And you feel the frustration of it, feel the pain of it. And you're looking up at the sun, and something blocks your view, and you look up, and there's this gentleman that all of a sudden this older gentleman. He's crazy that he's there. But he picks you up, and he's looking in your eyes, and he's got these wise blue eyes. And he just tells you to follow him up further. And so you start following this guy. And you're climbing up, following this guy, and you don't know why you're going up. But he starts whispering things to you. He starts telling you something about your identity, and he's telling you these things, and it's giving you energy. He's telling you something important, something you've needed to hear. And you get to the top, and it's this open field. the gentleman, he just looks at you and he says, follow me, it's time to run. And he just takes off and he starts running and you start following after him. And you're running full speed. You're trying to keep up with him, but you can't even keep up with him. He's running so fast. And it's like all these fears are getting off of you, all the failures. You're just running full speed. You're just following him. And you're wondering, is he going to ever stop? What is going on? I can't even keep up. You're almost to the point of exhaustion, but you feel so free. And then all of a sudden, he just slows down. And he looks back at you and he smiles. And he just says, you know, you are enough. You are enough. You are loved. I love you. You are enough. Let me close this in a word of prayer. Lord God, we just thank you so much that you are who you are, that you care about us, that you've designed us with such intentionality, and that you're there with us every step of the way. Through triumph, through tragedy, you never leave our side. We just thank you, God. Thank you for tonight. Thank you for the relationships that we're building here. Thank you for this community. Thank you for your spirit and what you're doing here. We love you, God. Amen.